a man, what does that mean? Yeah.
No, you're supposed to be tough and strong.
Yeah, tough, strong.
Stop whining.
Stop whining.
Don't cry.
Don't cry.
Dominant.
Dominant, yep. Yeah. What about men who would step outside of that box of how they're supposed to act by society?
But they were seen as weak.
Yeah, they're seen as weak, right? And what are weak men called? Yeah. So we hear a lot of homophobic language around that, right? So the foundations of violence against women and the history of that and the foundations of homophobia, transphobia tend to be pretty similar, right? And if we say act like a lady, what does that mean?
Proper.
Passive.
Meek.
Obedient, yeah.
Don't swear.
Don't swear. Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah.
food too.
You don't do that, right?
This isn't saying this is what you think. Again, I'm really having this on like a broad societal level of some of the stereotypes that we have about gender, right? So we have these boxes where men are supposed to fit in a box, women are supposed to fit in a box, and if you step out of those boxes is when you're called a lot of homophobic names, right? So it can apply to any gender, and then even this discussion leaves out our non-binary folks. And so we've got elements of transphobia here, and we've got these themes that run through both the history of the intimate partner violence movement and LGBTQ history here. So if we're thinking about, where do we start to end this, right? This could be like a whole college course. So it's just sort of like illustrating that there's a link between the two, and the foundations that we're fighting are the same, right? So when we talk about interconnection and making sure that we're not excluding any groups, we have to look at the privileges of some and the histories of different groups and how they intersect. So we really want to think intersectionally about where some of this stuff comes from. And so what happens to people when they step out of the boxes of where they are supposed to be based on their perceived gender, right? That's where they are harassed or discriminated against, or sometimes physically assaulted, right? So this is where we have a lot of that coming from. And so there's an influence of gender stereotypes on sexism, which is the underlying theme of what we're talking about here. So just a little bit of connection there, right? Okay, so who experiences intimate partner violence? So some statistics here: 44% of lesbian women, 61% of bisexual women. There's more and more research emerging around the bisexual community in particular that mental health outcomes tend to be worse than other LGBTQ populations, so we're starting to see some data around that. 35% of heterosexual women. So when we were talking in the beginning about what do we think of, and we all think of heterosexual women as being victims, the statistics actually show higher rates of victimization among lesbian women and bisexual women. We've got 26% of gay men experiencing intimate partner violence, 37% of bisexual men, 29% of heterosexual men. So, yes.
You might have answers, and you might not. It's fine either way.
Yeah.
But do we know why bisexual women are so much more at risk for like sexual assault and IPV and things like that?
I don't know why when it comes to that. Some of the mental health outcomes, there's, and this is sort of just the hypothesis, but because sometimes there's rejection from the straight community and the gay community, and so that can be a factor that could potentially play a role. I'm not sure when it comes to IPV though. There's just not enough research yet.
Yeah. Okay.
And I will get some more information on specifically the transgender community, but we don't have a lot of data when it comes to intimate partner violence. There just isn't enough research yet, and that is one of the problems that we see. But we do have some statistics on violence in general in the transgender community. So this is all according to the 2015 US Transgender Survey. So we see 46% verbally harassed in the past year, 1 in 10 physically attacked because of being transgender. And this isn't in the course of intimate relationships. This is just, these are broad statistics. But I wanted to make sure that we lay the foundation here to talk a little bit more about what happens when intimate partner violence is added on top of the trauma that the transgender population is already experiencing. So we do have some data on sexual assault saying that nearly half, 47%, of those participating in the survey were sexually assaulted at some point in their lifetime, and 1 in 10 sexually assaulted in the past year. If we look at communities of color, the numbers are even higher. So 53% of Black respondents were sexually assaulted in their lifetime within the transgender community, and 13% were sexually assaulted in the last year, right? So race plays a role as well. 72% of those surveyed have done sex work, 65% have experienced homelessness, and 61% with disabilities report being sexually assaulted in their lifetime. And more than half experienced some form of intimate partner violence. So the reason I wanted to put the data up here specifically about violence in the transgender community is to understand that if there is a baseline trauma already being experienced and a community that is experiencing such high rates of violence, intimate partner violence added on top of that can exacerbate the trauma symptoms that someone may be experiencing. So it's important to know the background, to understand what a population may already be facing before you add additional trauma. So when it comes to trauma, often what happens is people have, so say we look at the verbal harassment, right? So the first time somebody's verbally harassed, they might just say, I don't care what people think about me, it's cool, it's fine, right? And just kind of like let it roll off, some people. And then it happens again, and every time it happens, break down just a little bit more and a little bit more. And when you're faced with fear and harassment and all of these things that are up here, when intimate partner violence happens, the chance of developing post-traumatic stress disorder is higher because there's already a baseline trauma that's happening within the community. So one of the things that we're working on for PERSAD, and one of the presentations that I'm going to be doing, is on trauma in the transgender population and how the rates of trauma just from existing in a transphobic world are already there before you add any incidents of trauma that we think of like intimate partner violence or sexual assault. So it's just really important to understand where someone might be coming from. Now, of course, that's not true of all trans people, so we can't speak in generalizations, but when we have statistics this high, we need to take that into account and to think about that. So. And these are some statistics here among LGBT youth. So transgender youth were not surveyed as part of this particular study, which is one of the gaps that we do have. So you can see a comparison, transgender youth is on the end and was surveyed separately. So there's heterosexual youth, LGBT youth, and then transgender youth. So we see rates of physical dating violence at 29% for heterosexual youth, 43% for LGBT, and 89% for transgender youth, right? So if we look at the numbers, again, we're thinking, we have these stereotypes of heterosexual relationships, but we have data that says that rates are higher in LGBT populations, right? So why? We don't know yet. These are just some of the limitations of research on intimate partner violence in the LGBT community. So for a lot of studies, there's presumed heterosexuality, measurement of sexual identity to the exclusion of sexual behavior or attraction. So if we take a step back and we think about asking someone's sexual orientation, that may or may not reflect their sexual behavior. So we could have someone who might say, yeah, I'm straight, but be engaging in sex with partners who are of the same gender. So when we think about behavior and attraction, that's not always the same as how someone may identify. So there's a wide range of ways that people identify, and their behavior may or may not match that. So we're missing data. And studies typically do not assess gender identity. So when we're surveying, men and women, we don't know who among the men and women might be trans and have different factors coming from that community, right? So that was one of the things that was talked about in the discussion this morning, was the way that some of the questions were asked were not always culturally affirming or appropriate, and we need to get better at asking questions to determine some of these data results. So there are some limitations right now. There are limitations, just from my background in victim services, there are limitations in general on studies on intimate partner violence, and then we get into this and it becomes even more limited. Okay, so when we talk about intimate partner violence, some of the things that we might talk about are threatening to out someone's gender identity, sexual orientation, HIV status, right? So if we think of partners who are in a relationship and someone is threatening to leave, oftentimes that's when the power and control will escalate. And so threatening to out somebody's identity can be part of a way to maintain that control over the person. If they're not out to family, if there are children involved, if one partner is a biological parent and the other maybe doesn't have the legal rights, that can be something that is used to have that power and control over someone. Insults based on sexual orientation or gender identity. So somebody might make comments like, you're not a real man, you're not a real woman, you're too gay. Endless list of things that could be brought up there. Tampering with medications necessary for transitioning, not allowing access to that, or hiding medications can be part of this. Refusing to use someone's pronouns or name. So someone who, is a way of having verbal control or psychological abuse towards a person, intentionally using their dead name or misgendering them as part of the course of abuse that can happen, right? So these are some things that are specific to our LGBTQ communities when it comes to intimate partner violence. So there are others. Oh. So I mentioned the threatening to take children, using privilege or ability to pass to threaten another partner, fetishizing the person's identity or body without consent, and using homophobia or transphobia of systems to threaten the partner. So these are some of the barriers that might exist, is where are the safe places to go, right? So saying no one will believe you, you can't go to a shelter because they won't accept you, you don't have the same legal protections. There's, an endless list of things that people can use to try to maintain power and control. So what are things that should be up here? Anything that you've seen in the course of working with people or other elements of power and control? Any ideas? Yeah.
Usually like isolating them from their friends and family.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, isolating them from supports is one of the first things that usually happens, and the way that can look can be really subtle in the beginning. So say people start dating and one partner says to the other, I just want to be around you all the time. I want to spend all of my time with you. Why don't you cancel your plans? Don't go to that group tonight. Don't go out. It's just you and me, right? So that sounds really sweet and romantic in the beginning, but it can also be a little isolating. Yeah.
Emotional abuse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We see. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say financial abuse.
Uh-huh. Yeah, absolutely. Financial abuse can be a big part of it. If people are in a relationship and one partner has control of the money, or maybe it's difficult to leave to find a place on your own if you don't have access to the means to afford to live on your own, these things can keep people really stuck in a relationship. Yeah.
One thing that kind of intersects with the financial abuse that I've seen is if one partner is a substance user and the other one is not, and the substance using partner is not the financial provider. The other partner will use that against them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Someone
Yeah, I don't know if everyone heard that, but if one partner has insurance, yeah, that's a real barrier to getting out of the relationship, especially if somebody needs medical care, if someone is in the process of transition, if they have medical needs, if, you know, we all need health insurance, right? So yeah, it's scary to not have that, so sure. Yeah, and this is often something that can build slowly over time. So in the beginning of an abusive relationship, it can feel like everything's great, everything's perfect, and this is your dream partner. And then slowly these things start to build. You were going to say something?
Yeah, so going off of that, just sort of that idea of, you know, I'm the only one who understands you, no one else would get you like I do, no one else will ever love you. If you leave, you'll be completely alone.
Yeah, yeah. And that can be where the isolation comes in too, is slowly removing you from people in your life so that it feels like this is my only support. So often what happens is that the abusive partner is also a support system, and so it can be really difficult to break that bond. It can also be a dangerous thing to do to leave an abusive relationship. So when we say, you know, why don't they just leave? There are a lot of complications to that. There's a lot that goes into making that decision and then carrying that out. So yeah, so when someone's telling you these things, it can start to feel true after a while.
Yeah. Even to tie into that, like stalking. Like if you do decide to leave, like they will stalk you.
Yes.
That's dangerous.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about safety planning in a minute. So
The tactic of gaslighting, where it's kind of reversed, where the abuser makes it look like they're being abused by the situation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that can happen in same gender relationships, I think especially, is flipping that to say, like, you know, when you're calling the legal system or getting them involved, who's the abuser, who's the victim? People are trained to see a heterosexual couple, right? So when you don't have that background or knowledge or ability to discern what's happening, it can put somebody in more danger, sure. Yeah.
When there's children involved, not just the custodial part of it, but just the stability of the children and homelessness and school and activities and all that, just being able to control their stability.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Yeah, and I think with physical violence too, thinking in terms of, you know, how does this build over time? Because, you know, I always would say, if somebody hit you on the first date, are you going to go on a second date with them? Probably not, right? So it doesn't happen that way. It happens in slow increments, and it starts off as, you know, these ideas of love and romance that we have, where the person is attentive, but it's a little bit too much. But it's hard to notice that when you're in that new relationship place where everything is great and everything is wonderful and you're really into that person. It's really hard to notice if maybe it's a little too much too soon. And that's when things can escalate, right? So it starts with, oh, stay home with me tonight. I'll miss you if you go out. And then it's, I don't want you seeing those people anymore. I don't want you go into this place, or building from there. So it can happen gradually. Oh, okay.
And I think it's the same thing with physical violence, where maybe the first time they make it look like an accident, or like, oh, I'm so sorry, I just got really upset, like I would never do that on purpose. And it just sort of, and the first thing you think, well, maybe it was just an accident. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I didn't think it was, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe I thought it was something different. Maybe there was a misunderstanding, and then it happens again. And, you know, maybe it's a different excuse that time. Maybe, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just causing this to me.
And then over time it turns into, look what you made me do.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I would never want to hurt you, but you make me.
Right.
You make me so mad.
And so these that you see up here are some things that are unique to LGBTQ communities when it comes to intimate partner violence, but the foundation of it is the same in any relationship, is that it's about having control over the other person. It's about gaining that in whatever way works. And when you are living in a world that is homophobic and transphobic, it can be, you know, you've got layers of who do you go to? right? So when we're talking about leaving an abusive situation, we talk about women's shelters, right? It's women's, most of the organizations' names have the word woman in them, right? So it can feel like, where do I go, what do I do? I know for several years when I worked at a shelter in Pittsburgh, we were very conscious of talking about how, you know, if there is a man who is a victim, if there is a transgender woman, you are welcome. If you are non-binary, you are welcome to come here, regardless of gender. And I think that that is especially important for victim service organizations to do, is to talk about that and to put that on your materials and to be very vocal about it, because we have a lot of organizations that people think only if you're a straight woman can you go here, right? So that fear of, what would it mean for me to go into the legal system? What does it mean to call the police? What does it mean to go to court? To go to the doctor? We talked earlier today in one of the presentations, there was some data on how comfortable people feel coming out to their PCP and the fear of what healthcare providers will think, right? So when we think about who do you go to, how are screenings done at the doctor's office, if someone's not comfortable being out about their sexual orientation or gender identity, how do they talk about this, right? Yeah.
I think we have to be careful as providers too. If we see two women come into our office together, two men, and that one person in the pair wants the other person to come in, we may not get to some of this. So kind of advocating, and I'm going to see you by yourself first, and then that person come in, so we can create that atmosphere in which there might be safety for them to be able to tell us.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
I think too, a lot of the time, if I go to see a PCP, I've never been asked at the PCP about sexual orientation, who am I having sex with, who am I attracted to, none of that stuff. I've never been asked pronouns, like nothing. So I think a lot of the time that opportunity may not come up in the course of interacting with a healthcare provider necessarily. Yeah, and I mean, like, you know, I'm lucky enough to work somewhere where that is something that's standard practice, but before that, I'd never interacted with a healthcare provider who would ask any of those questions. And so that might not even be something that's come up. And I've never been asked about, am I in a situation that is unsafe at home? Am I in a situation where I'm being coerced or being threatened or being emotionally controlled? Never been asked any of those questions in any healthcare facility that I've ever been to.
Yeah, I think that's starting to become a thing. Because I serve in the UPCP and they ask me all of that. Everything but the pronouns. But are you safe? Who do you live with? What's your sexual orientation? Who are you sleeping with? Like, it's both the behavior and the orientation.
Yeah.
So hopefully you just had like crappy doctors and it's
Okay, so you had your hand up and then you have to.
I was just going to say, at my OBGYN, they do ask, like, are you safe? Are you being coerced? Are you being abused? I was just wondering, do they ask males presenting that question too?
Hopefully, ideally.
Right.
The way that they're being trained, I think that there is more awareness of making sure to ask people of all genders and not just female presenting folks. So I'm hoping that is starting to expand. And that's something that I see shifting within the victim service field as well is, you know, it used to be ask women, and it was very woman focused. And we're starting to see, you know, more inclusiveness when it comes to genders. And you had your hand up?
I was going to say the same thing. I had an OBGYN who, years ago, started asking those questions as well to patients.
Yeah. That's great. So it's moving a little bit, but not enough. And so we need to keep working on that. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, when I started talking about adolescent relationship abuse, I was forbidden to say the word gay in a school, right? So sometimes I like to pause and reflect on some progress, not enough, but we are moving a little bit as we go forward. And this is by no means an exhaustive list of ways that one can have power and control over others in the LGBT community, but it gives you some idea of some of the unique challenges and unique ways of controlling another person that you might see among the LGBT population that you don't see in ways that we were taught about heterosexual intimate partner violence. So the fears of the systems, the fears in using some of the oppression in our society against the individual.
And it's important for providers to realize that. So if you have a patient who is transgender and they're not taking their medications, that could be a sign of abuse. That if you're not framing it that way, you might have missed.
Absolutely, yeah. Go ahead.
I'm from the insurance piece, so when we review with providers in clinical settings and such, one of our questions that we do ask during that review, is the member safe? Are they in a safe and secure environment? Are they expressing any environmental, cultural recovery needs, those types of things? So we're trying on our end to make sure that we're addressing it, because if they say we don't know, then our expectation is to have her provider go back to the individual and establish that conversation.
Okay, yeah, that's great, that's great. Yeah, it's important for all of us to be on the same page, to be aware of these things and to notice and to ask too, to ask in a way that, asks, are you okay? Are you feeling safe? Because if we frame it as, are you a victim of abuse? Somebody may be unsafe and not identify as a victim of abuse, right? So they may not see what's happening as abusive behavior, but they could very well be unsafe. So we have to be cautious of the way we frame that. Do you feel isolated? Is someone harming you? Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells at home? Asking some questions like that. Or not even at home, right? So partners don't live together. Do you feel safe with your partner? Yeah, and so when we, all of us in whatever role we play in our jobs or in our personal lives, will come across someone who has been a victim of intimate partner violence. When I started doing this work, I was in college. I was really young when I started doing this work, and I remember at the time knowing probably 15 people or so by the age of 20 that had been through this, right? So we all know people personally and professionally who have been through this, and so being able to connect someone with safety planning resources is really important. And safety planning is, I always think of it like a fire drill, right? So if we look around the hotel here, we're probably going to see a fire evacuation plan somewhere, right? Because if we're in crisis, we need to know what to do. And a safety plan is a similar tool that somebody can create so that if they're feeling unsafe or are in crisis, they have a way that's already been planned out to address that and to get out of the situation. So it's planning what to do ahead of time, preparing what you need to carry out the plan, and rehearsing the steps. So these are some tools to do some safety planning. So identifying LGBTQ competent service providers. So someone who may need that support, where do they go? Depending on where you live in Pennsylvania, can you contact the local shelters and say, hey, what happens if we have the need to utilize your shelter? Making sure ahead of time before you need it that you know where the nearest LGBTQ competent and affirming providers are. That could be the first step, is seeking those out. Keeping a journal of incidents that can help in the future if somebody needs to get a protection from abuse order, which in Pennsylvania is granted in a few different ways. So there's the emergency PFA, which is good for 24 hours or until the next business day. There's the temporary, which is granted by the local magistrate, or here in Allegheny County can be granted by family court, that lasts for 10 days. And then somebody would need to go back for a hearing where both victim and perpetrator would be present to share their experience of what happened, and the judge makes a determination whether the PFA is granted. Those can be granted for up to 3 years. And in Allegheny County, and most counties in Pennsylvania, can't speak for other counties because I live in Allegheny County, but there are victim service providers who can meet somebody in the courts and help them through that process. So it's just an important detail to know, is that there's support, there's information, so somebody doesn't have to know all the steps of what to do. If you call one of the providers, they can assist with that. Sometimes setting up a code word or phrase, so if somebody's on the phone and their partner, they're feeling unsafe, if they can say like, hey, did you do laundry? Did you get the laundry out of the dryer? Or like, how's your dog doing? Or whatever it is that means I need help. Setting that up with somebody that you trust ahead of time can be a way to alert them that something's wrong. Having all important information gathered in one place. So health insurance information, ID and birth certificate, court order for legal name change or gender change marker. If someone has a letter for surgery, you don't want to lose that, right? So it's important paperwork. You want to make sure you know where that is and have it if you need to leave in an emergency. and any medications that someone may need. So just planning ahead and knowing where all that stuff is. Becoming aware of your electronic trail. So say that you're leaving an abusive situation and you are out to dinner with some friends and somebody tags you on social media. Well, now the abuser knows where you are, right? So just things like that we don't think of unless it would be dangerous for us to do those things. So thinking about where's your information online? If you post something somewhere, does your location pop up? Is that safe? You know, just kind of thinking about that and asking those questions. Develop habits that take you out of the home regularly. So if it's like, I'm going to the grocery store. One day when you go to the grocery store, maybe you don't come back, right? So just having these outs where you can get out of the house if necessary. And having that be a habit.
Are there, I'm gonna talk on like complement service providers, are there any in Allegheny County that you have found like they're resourceful or like useful in these situations?
Women's Center and Shelter, they have started some communication with PERSAD, and that would be probably what I would recommend. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
On a little bit of a different note, for Adagio Health, we only have one clinic in Turtle Creek in Allegheny County, but we also have sub-providers, and we're funded by Title X. And so what I tend to talk about in terms of safety is that if a woman is, or anyone is in an abusive relationship and needs to get access to birth control and they don't want their partner to know about it, we provide confidential services. So if they're on their partner's insurance, it doesn't have to show up. And that's one thing that I think sometimes people don't necessarily think about is where can I go get an IUD or where can I get something like that so that I don't get pregnant and maybe because the situation is getting better or something like that or whatever. But anyone who's funded by Title X, Planned Parenthood, there's several clinics, all of those that can provide confidential services.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you.
And that's the key word you use when making the appointment, like confidential.
Yeah, confidential. If you make a warm referral, confidential.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and we could do a whole other presentation on reproductive coercion.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Just a resource, just in case.
Yeah. But thank you for bringing that up because that's another important element of power and control is someone who is trying to get their partner pregnant, someone who tampers with birth control. All of those things can be elements of control in a relationship too that we need to be aware of, and we need to offer options for that. So knowing where to go for those confidential services can be critical for people. So just tips for your organization. I'm sure a lot of you are doing this already, but just reflecting diverse families, identities, and expressions, right? So a lot of times when we would see information about intimate partner violence, we would see heterosexual couples. So I know the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence for years now has had same-gender couples represented on their posters and materials, and so that's a place where you can get that from. Also, if you look up Futures Without Violence, and I did have a card that I borrowed from the Adagio table. Oh, here it is. They have these. Anybody can order them. They're free. You only have to pay shipping. But this is a safety planning card for specifically transgender folks. So this is really a great resource to say, hey, we're here for you. Just like leaving these out in your waiting room, leaving them around. I can just pass this around if people want to take a look. It was the only one that they had left, and I ordered some, but they didn't come in time, or I would have one for everyone. But like I said, Futures Without Violence, they are a national organization for IPV, and you can order these for free. So everybody can get them for your organization. So if you just want to take a look, you can pass it around the room. Some other tips for your organization. If you have a gender checkbox, can you change that? Is that possible for you to leave it open-ended? There are so many genders that we can't possibly have a checkbox for all of them. So can we make changes like that? Allow space for legal and chosen names. We're already doing a lot of these things. I know a lot of us in the room. Not assuming a person's identity, including non-discrimination and equality statements and agency policies, using gender-neutral language, and knowing your referrals. So I mentioned, PERSAD Center, we do have some programs for intimate partner violence. So let me skip to the Better Intervention Program, BIP, is a service that PERSAD does provide. It is a court-mandated program. So if there are members of a relationship who are arrested and they are mandated to attend some sort of program, they can be mandated to attend services at PERSAD Center. Sometimes both partners are arrested and maybe both have to attend. They do not attend together, so that's important to know. It's a 25-week program, and the court mandates that they pay for the classes. It is income-based, so cost can vary depending on somebody's income. PERSAD has to report to the courts if someone is attending. And the sessions cover things like jealousy, substance use, relationship dynamics, communication skills. If someone doesn't attend or drops out of the program before they're done, then sometimes the alternative is jail. So that's what would happen. Yeah.
So if someone is court mandated to do like anger management, something or other, but is arrested for something like partner violence, is that something that like a therapist could talk to their courts or explain to them that they might be referred to this as a replacement for that?
Typically all that happens in the court system. So the therapists aren't usually involved yet at that level, but they may have. So this is where our systems are sort of separate, where they might have a victim advocate from one of the victim service organizations who can be there to advocate on their behalf. So sometimes what happens is when the police come and they don't know what happened and both people have marks on them, everybody goes to jail, right? So whoever's involved, everybody goes to jail, and then it gets sorted out in the court system. And from there, it's determined, okay, well, you were the abuser, so you're mandated to go to this, right? So advocates can be helpful at that level of the system, so.
Okay, so then it's like if we were to receive a referral for someone needing anger management that was court mandated, that would be something that we could be like, this is a really good group, you should do this. To fulfill
I think usually the court says you have to go to this.
Okay.
Like the
typically
court.
the referrals that I get, it's sort of open where they get mandated to doing like an X number of anger management, something or other, and then we can sort of choose what it is that we feel like they need.
Okay.
So I just didn't know if that was like another resource we could use.
I think that, yeah, and some people come to this VIP group voluntarily, so yeah, so we would be able to take people. Yeah, sometimes people choose to come in to learn some skills, and other times they are court mandated to attend. So yeah, I worked for Center for Victims for a number of years, and it would often happen where, everybody involved would be arrested, and sometimes that meant that the victim of abuse was arrested as well as the perpetrator. And so at the time we had a group for people that were arrested but really were victims. So it would be more like a support group, and that fulfilled the requirements of the court. So is it within the legal system, if everybody has marks on them, everybody's getting arrested until we can figure it out later. So, yep. So the Better Intervention Program is run by one of our staff members, Kathy Boyle, who's out doing trainings in the community quite a bit, so some of you may have seen her at various things. She runs the group. She at times has done some individual sessions with people. There can be a wait sometimes, because if she's in the middle of doing 25 sessions, somebody's going to have to wait until that's over before they're able to get started with that. So. There was also an informal support group. It was more of a peer support group-based program at PERSAD for victims, and people that had either were presently or in the past were experiencing intimate partner violence. It was really an unstructured, it was not a therapeutic group, but it was a place for people to come together to talk. So if you check the website, if anybody follows us on Facebook, there was information there about that. And people can call to ask questions about when that's meeting. I don't know that the schedule is consistent, so I don't want to say it meets at X time. I think it just depends on who we have that's interested at the time. So those are some places to go to get some immediate services. And I think in identifying who in the community are your service providers, who can you go to in a crisis, things like that would be important to know, because we want to make sure that they're culturally affirming before interacting with them. So yeah, so PERSAD does not have the crisis services. Unfortunately, we do provide therapy services, but like I mentioned in the beginning, there can sometimes be a wait, which is why it's good to have a balance of crisis victim advocacy providers and people who provide therapy. So often in therapy, we're dealing with the effects of abuse after somebody's already safe, right? So knowing where to go if you're not safe, and then how to resolve some of the things that might have come up during the course of the abuse. Okay. All right, so I wanted to leave a couple of minutes for questions. Questions, comments, thoughts? Yeah.
Are there any programs that exist that can kind of teach young people preventative strategies, like how to recognize abuse, avoid abuse, don't be an abuser?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of the victim service organizations do school-based programs where they go into the schools. That's what I did when I was at Center for Victims. I did that for 8 years, and we worked with schools to build teen leadership teams, to raise awareness with their peers. So it was sort of like a peer-to-peer, let's talk about healthy relationships. And I know Women's Center and Shelter does stuff in the schools. Crisis Center North is another one of our intimate partner violence agencies in Allegheny County. Pittsburgh Action Against Rape does some stuff. So there are some organizations out there doing that work. On a national level, Futures Without Violence has some great programs as well. Yeah.
We recently received at Adagio a PCCD grant, and we'll be implementing a program called the Date Safe Project. It comes with a curriculum book called Can I Kiss You? And it's mostly focused on consent, but it's been shown to be very successful. It's evidence-based, and we'll be implementing that in Lawrence County.
Okay.
In Lawrence County. It's Newcastle, in the Newcastle.
Yep.
Yes, I'm not from Pennsylvania. I had no idea either until I applied for the grant. So I was like, oh, okay, now I know where that is. No, it's not Butler. It's actually right next to Ohio. It's Lawrence County is the one that's butts up to Ohio. So yeah, but we are hoping to have a lot of success with it. But if you want to keep in touch, we're more than happy to let you know how it's going. And if it's, and I have extra books if you want.
What's the name of the curriculum one more time?
It's called the Date Safe Project, and I think they're changing their name to the Center for Respect or something. I don't know. And the curriculum is called Can I Kiss You? I'll send you a book if you want.
That program?
Pardon?
Who will be administering that?
Adagio Health.
Adagio.
So we're running the program in the Newcastle school system, in the middle and high school. So, and along with doing the grant specifically, sorry, I don't mean to get too off topic, but just so you know how some of the funding is working from the state at this point and what they're looking for in case someone is interested, is a more holistic program where we're also going to be doing training with school safety and security officers, as well as training for the police officers, who my understanding is have not had any training in about 5 years.
Yeah.
So I was actually going to talk to you about some of the opportunities around that to possibly work together. So that's kind of at least a project that we're undertaking.
Yeah, and there are various programs out there. I know not all of you are from the Pittsburgh area, but I mentioned Futures Without Violence already. They do the card that I was passing around. That's again where that came from. They also do a lot on reproductive coercion, which I mentioned briefly. They do a program called Coaching Boys into Men. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but that's a program that's implemented primarily with middle school boys, but can also go up to sometimes college, and really talks about toxic masculinity and what we were talking about in the beginning about how some of those gender roles fuel these attitudes around how men are supposed to act, and so addresses some of those topics and tries to get to some of those root causes. There's also the Green Dot program, which is really for college and community level, but that is another prevention program that's out there. So there are a lot of things happening in terms of prevention. I would suggest contacting the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape and the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Those two organizations work with all counties throughout Pennsylvania, and both have prevention specialists that you'd be able to talk to about what's happening in your county. So, yeah.
Just an add-on, I know that especially for people around the Pittsburgh area, it's really hard to get enough like sort of community level, really low cost, accessible therapy services.
Yeah.
And Planned Parenthood has just started doing behavioral health services and has a sliding fee scale for really, really affordable prices. It's income based, not Title X based, but like literal just individual based. We also are accepting insurances. We've got Medicaid and UPMC and Highmark right now, but we're going to be accepting all the rest of the insurances.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.